When the boss wants to make sure that you're absolutely always on task, sometimes you have to maliciously comply. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, so you want me to get married? Not my story, but I was present ages ago at the wedding in question. This young woman becomes pregnant with a partner with whom she lived. The Catholic mother takes a dim view of this and is probably a little afraid of, what will people say? The mother therefore urges her daughter to get married and ends up threatening to disinherit her. So she organized her wedding. The civil marriage took place relatively normally, but once at the Catholic Church, she invited her zealous pastor uncle, with whom her mother no longer wanted to talk about faith, to give a mini preach in addition to that of the priest, and chose evangelical songs that obviously no one knew. At the exit of the church, I don't know how she managed to put this together, but she told me a few years later that she chose the priest specifically because of it. 2 police officers were waiting for the priest because he was under investigation for acts towards children. After the photos, she arrived at the meal with the bottom of her wedding dress completely soiled. I even wonder if she served contaminated seafood because people at the parents' table ended up sick. She was not disinherited. I mean, you can't argue with the results. They never said it had to be a good wedding. They never said it had to be a good experience, just that you have to get married. Well, don't you worry, I will get married, but it's gonna be an experience you just don't want to remember. Hot Adhesiveness 438 commented, so if I read this right, she complied to the demand of her mother to get married, yay inheritance, but purposefully made the event as malicious towards the Catholic churchgoers and mom as possible. Invited zealot uncle that her mother hated. Zealot uncle was asked to give a speech and choose the music to tick off mom more. Predator priest. Bride called the cops and made a scene. Food poisoned the guest she didn't like. Dirtied her dress during pictures. I'm curious what those showed. Maybe jumping in mud and puddles for fun. Very interesting wedding. OP responded saying, that's it. The cops were just waiting for the priest to exit. We didn't see them cuff the priest. Yes, she probably walked in the mud, but I think the photos were traditional. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, whatever you do, don't speak French. This happened in school when I was around 15. It was in a French-speaking region, and my English class had a very strict but somewhat sassy teacher, Miss Jones. The one golden rule was no French. You had to speak in English no matter what, except emergencies, of course. Miss Jones wasn't messing around, but she had a sense of humor. For example, one day during recess, someone wrote on the board, Miss Jones is a beach. When she saw it, she started screaming, "What is wrong with you? I'm not a beach. I'm a curse word." Then she spelled correctly the word and wrote it on the board. She added, besides, it's not a bad thing. It stands for a babe in total control of herself. One day in class, Miss Jones mentioned war, and a student didn't know what the word meant. So Miss Jones starts explaining it in English. The student doesn't get it. Other students pitch in, still in English, to no results. This goes on for some time. I get fed up and say, this is a waste of time. Can we just translate the word in French and move on? Miss Jones answers, well, if you're so smart, why don't you explain what it means? And no French. All right. I start making pow-pow noises, explosions, imitating warplanes, the whole deal. It takes 3 seconds to the student to yell, I get it. You know, I know OP was trying to explain what war is, but it just seems fitting, to say no French. And so your go-to is just to immediately pull out the imaginary weapon. Ain't nothing more American sounding than being able to communicate exactly what you mean through a bunch of pew-pew-pews. Look, it's a name commented. Ah yes, the language of all frequent travelers. Just point at stuff and gesture until the other person understands what you mean, and add in the occasional word that you might have learnt, in the hopes that it might help matters a bit. Our next story is 16-year-old assigned a community service of picking up garbage. I was a troublesome teenager who committed a minuscule crime and ended up with court-assigned community service. Completely guilty. Community service was a way to take your punishment without a permanent record. The task was to collect trash in the town on foot and return to the site at XYZ time with a full bag and no empties remaining. Instructions unclear, proceeded to pick up trash to and from my friend's house with a healthy 6-hour respite and left the spare bags for his family to use. Completely missed the point of community service. However, I felt like quite the clever degen at the time. Fast forward 2 decades later, and I'm a constant garbage picker-upper while walking the dog. well, may not have affected OP immediately in the moment, when they're still going through their rebellious teenage phase, but down the road, they're looking back on it, and it made some kind of impact in OP's life. I'm actually kind of curious of how many of you guys, if you walk by and you see like a water bottle just sitting on the side of the road, how many of you guys would actually pick it up to throw away later? You know what, maybe a water bottle is a bad example because I would look at a water bottle and I would think that could have been in contact with either end of a person and I don't know if I want to take that chance. Savvy Sillybug commented, "What the heck do they expect with instructions like that? Why give you plenty if they expect a full bag and no empty ones?" Good compliance. This next story is Weaponized Incompetence. When I was a young technical writer, I worked for a small software company that was kind of winding down. Our administrator left or was let go, I can't remember, but in any case, she was not there any longer. At the next development meeting, they asked me to take minutes. I'm a writer, right? And a woman, so maybe that had something to do with it? Anyway, minute taking was not in my job description, but I agreed to do it. I had learned weaponized incompetence from my brothers who used to do chores so poorly that they would be reassigned to me. During the meeting, I wrote down every dumb joke and stupid comment the developers made. I included everything in the meeting minutes, which were distributed to the whole company. Fallout, they never asked me to take minutes again. What's weaponized incompetence? I've never heard of such a thing. I can't even imagine how one person would do such a thing. Please don't challenge me on this and therefore allow me to continue to weaponize my incompetence. Karate Cat commented, "Love it. I was expecting really pee-poor notes like, Dave said something about saving money. Mark said, John wants to rewrite some of the programs. Just the parts that don't work, I think. Hard to keep up with the talking, sorry. But overdoing it is just as good. This weaponized competence, which I never really knew was a thing until just now, you were too good at note-taking. Awesome. Our next story is, asked me to translate live? Fine, I will. This was more than 15 years ago, but it still makes me smile. I worked for a non-profit which was owned by a mother company. The manager of the non-profit managed to run the company into the ground financially, and the mother company considered two options: firing us all and rehiring us with no accumulated benefits and no tenure, or firing us and selling the company. This was in Israel, official language Hebrew, but the mother company were all Americans. They decided to have a meeting with all the workers to discuss the terms of our continuing to work, but instead the discussion be held in English. The employees all spoke Hebrew, of course, and many weren't fluent in spoken English. But the mother company representatives doubled down on the language, despite the fact that many of them knew Hebrew. It was clearly a tactic to confuse the workers. In the end, the compromise was that the meeting would be held in English with on-the-spot translation supplied by our company. As the only total bilingual, I was asked to translate. I knew that they were trying to sell us a rotten deal. I also knew some of their people knew Hebrew, so I could not indicate my opinion about what was said, or even use a sarcastic tone when I knew what was said was false or manipulative. So, I translated, faithfully, but whenever I had to translate something the mother company representative said, which I knew was manipulative, I made a slightly longer pause before the main part of the sentence. All my coworkers caught on very quickly. The mother company's offers were rejected, we hired a good lawyer, and got nearly twice the severance pay they initially offered us. Too bad they didn't have a fine ear for speech rhythm. It kind of reminds me of the classic joke about comedy. It goes something like, what's the difference between a good joke and a bad joke? Timing. Coder Joe 1 commented, you were the hero they needed. OP responded saying, actually, I'm really proud of another thing I did at the time. During the last half year, when they were winding things up, they kicked out the manager and put in a temp. A very strict and goal-oriented manager, and at the same time, a very compassionate man. I spoke to him and told him the secretaries would all be looking for jobs. They all knew Word but not Excel, and knowing Excel would help them secure jobs. He promptly set up a series of workshop meetings, and I taught them Excel. I know it helped them get jobs afterwards. Our next story is classic just get on with the freaking job. This was from a few years ago while I was working an assembly line for food. We used to get orders that we would make up for distribution. For example, 1,000 lasagna microwave meals, 800 bolognese, etc. As all the products were perishable, we tried not to overfulfill the orders at all, as the chances of us being able to place elsewhere was slim due to the time factor. I led one of the lines, and one day I get the order through at 10 times its usual volume. I go to speak to the boss to double check, and he turns on me, asks if I'm incompetent, and tells me just get the crap done. Okay boss, whatever you say. We usually process about 4 different lines a day, and when he came for his check-in around halfway through the shift was when crap hit the fan. It was then he realized that there was a mistake and we had overproduced the order by 5 times at that point. There was nothing he could say but to move on to the next line. He had to eat a huge loss on his figures for waste. It was glorious. Yeah, so in situations like this, should you challenge the boss on this and say, listen, I know there's something wrong, you can scream at me all you want? Or is it one of those situations where you go, alright boss, it's not on me. It's almost kind of like a we do in circles now kind of hypothetical. Shall I report this post-haste and make sure it gets known? Or, okay, we just do in circles now then, boss. Rachel Silver commented, we ran half a day too long on an order when I worked at a plastics company. That product didn't spoil, but we only sold it to one buyer, and we had made enough to supply them for over a year. The boss who freaked up got in some crap because they had to find a place to store it until it got sold. Our next story is, don't like the vulgar lyrics? Okay. I read a previous post about annoying a disgruntled neighbor with loud music, and I figured I'd share one of my own. Here we go. First, some info. This happened over 12 years ago at my family's house when I was around 21 or 22, and I was passionate about my old SUV that I'd painted a metallic red with neon lights underneath and had on 22-inch low pro chrome rims. Oh, and a decent stereo that you can hear about a quarter mile away. Our neighbors themselves paid absolutely no attention to anything going on outside their doors. Though we're all friendly and any one of us would drop what we're doing to help one in need, in 20 years, you can count the conversations we've exchanged without taking off your shoes, and we all have our own little hobbies. One has chickens and goats, another keeps bees. The one across the road repairs lawnmowers, ATVs, and such, and I never do anything that would normally invite onlookers. One Saturday afternoon, I was changing the oil and spark plugs on my SUV with a beer and Cheetos in our driveway, and had a tiny little speaker hooked up to my phone playing some old school rap. On that day, the neighbor lady left of us was having some landscaping or yard work done. I was rolling around under my truck, on my back, elbow deep in a greasy mess and a little irritated because I had dropped that famous 10mm socket, and I see some steel-toed leather boots walking the 30 feet up to my driveway and up to my Suburban. I roll out from under my murder machine and gave the guy a very confused look. He just straight up told me to turn down my music because he didn't like vulgar and violent lyrics. It's like gospel must be the only music he ever listens to. And I know for a fact that this little speaker couldn't possibly be legible to anyone 50 feet away, especially if it's concentrated at cutting shrubs and planting flowers and such. Despite my passions, I'm not a complete male body part. I say, okay, no problem. I'll take care of it as soon as I get my hands wiped off. Have a nice day. He stomped away in a fit, muttering something along the lines of, freaking white trash wannabe N-word. He was white, but in an old, cranky kind of white. That really sickened me. Then I had an idea. I immediately turned off my tiny speaker playing Underground Kings and pulled out the battery jump box, put it on my truck's battery, and went inside my house and got my opera CD collection, rolled down all the windows to unveil my 4 12-inch subs and 8 6-inch mids and tweets, and put on the Valkyrie by Wagner and unleashed the stereo's 2,000 watts, and went back under my SUV to finish draining the oil. The look on the guy's face was priceless. Guess he didn't think a white trash wannabe N-word had a taste for opera. Not usually something I bring out to a hot day of rolling around in oil, but I do enjoy it when I relax with the hi-fi in the den. After about 20 minutes, I was done with the tune-up and started up the truck and drove it up and down the road to make sure the oil level settled. I parked back in my driveway, shutting everything down, and as I put everything away, I see the landscaping truck leaving without taking the time to close his tailgate, and by some sweet karma, some of his tools rolled out as he slammed the gas pedal. I had to turn around so he wouldn't see my ear-to-ear grin. 2 days after, while taking the trash out, I waved to the neighbor lady who was having tea on the porch, and I explained what happened and wanted to apologize if I caused her trouble with her yard artist. That sweet old lady just laughed and said, he's a jerk anyway, and that he tells her grandson to lower the volume on his video games if he's over while he's working. I still see the same landscaping truck once in a while, so I guess he still has the contract. Update: after talking with my mother about this post, I found out that the landscaping guy was the husband of a family friend of the neighbor lady, and it wasn't his actual job, just taking care of the yard for a friend. So that may explain why he felt so entitled. Now that we've heard OP's story, I'm trying to rack my brain thinking about what A is the most conventional, non-offensive music, that B is also the most annoying. To the right person, opera really could be a good option. To me, I feel like it would be something that's just like stupidly repetitive. I don't even remember what song it was. I'm assuming maybe it was called Turn It Up, but I was playing Rocket League a while back, and somebody scored, and it's just this song that just keeps going Turn It Up a million times in a row. It was like the most generic EDM music that just keeps going Turn It Up, Turn It Up, Turn It Up, Turn It Up. Another classic option maybe could be like Baby Shark. CKO Saccharinoid commented, bagpipes would have been funnier, but Wagner is epic for sure to blast to pee someone off over music that cannot be heard from the road at all. Our next story is, okay HR, he's your problem now. Like some of my previous stories, this tale revolves around my time as a supervisor in a call center, an employee who didn't like me called Jamers, and my malicious compliance with HR. Jamers was a new hire, probably around 21 at the time, young kid whom you could tell grew up privileged and entitled. But hey, I didn't do the hiring and everyone deserves a chance starting out somewhere. I just wish this guy was hired somewhere else. Now, I prided myself as being a fair guy, friendly and understanding. Jamers, however, was always the victim and nothing was ever his fault. Customer complained on his service, not his fault. Incorrect information given, he was told the wrong information. Called off, something had come up beyond his control. On and on it went with him, nothing ever his fault. The issue with me came to a head when I had to correct him on a call he took. The information he gave was so incorrect and potentially damaging to the client, I had to call the client and give them the correct information while apologizing for the misinformation. Company policy at the time caused this to be an automatic write-up. I brought Jamers to an office, door opened, mind you, to tell him he was being written up and why. At first, it started with every excuse in the book. Then it started with him asking why I was being hostile and mean. I wasn't, and why I was yelling. Again, I wasn't, and the door was left open, so there would have been multiple witnesses. He refused to sign the write-up. That's fine, it would go in his file regardless. As we were done, he marched up to HR. About half an hour later, HR called me into their office. They asked me why I yelled and cussed at Jamers. What? Now, my bad for not having another soup with me when writing him up, but everyone would have heard me yelling had it happened. I'm a big guy and my voice carries. I denied this, of course. HR told me they were throwing out this write-up since, to them, it wasn't a big issue. This act effectively neutered me, which caused a ripple effect. It was now known if I did my job, HR would just reverse anything I did. HR also told me from here on out, if Jamers had an issue or infraction, they would handle it. Okay, so here is where the malicious compliance comes into play. They had zero idea how many side conversations and other crap I had to deal with when it came to Jamers. Needed to call off? Sorry, go talk to HR. Got a complaint? I'd tell them to go to HR and I'd send them an email why. Requesting a day off? Off to HR you went. It became a fact that HR had to deal with him once to twice a day for months. Anything even slightly minor, I sent them to HR. I know it was driving them insane, as they hated to be bothered. Finally, HR asked me to have a meeting with them. They told me Jamers called off and he was going to be put on a final, and they wanted me to do it. I reminded them they asked to be put in charge of him. We came to a compromise, as I wanted to play nice, and said we both would. Jamers was brought to the office and told he was being put on a final for attendance. But it wasn't his fault, he cried. He had to go to the doctor. HR asked for his doctor's excuse. He said he would bring it tomorrow. The next day, Jamers came into HR and said, "This isn't working out, I quit." HR got a hint of what I dealt with, and the trash took itself out. I love the justice. If OP was able to prove to HR that whatever information Jamers gave that was apparently so misinformed it could be damaging, And HR turned around and said, well, I don't think it's really all that big of a deal. Then what is HR there for? Because they're not protecting the company, which is usually what HR is there for. I mean, fundamentally, HR isn't even supposed to be something that's for the employee's benefit, but to protect the company. Anna V quoted, "The information he gave was so incorrect and potentially damaging to the client, I had to call the client and give them the correct information while apologizing for the misinformation. Company policy at the time caused this to be an automatic write-up." They further quote, "HR told me they were throwing out this write-up since, to them, it wasn't a big issue." Somehow, I don't think Jamers was the only issue here. If HR thinks something that's an automatic write-up and can be damaging to clients isn't a big issue, you need a new HR. Our next story is, how will you know if I'm working? Oh, you'll know. This happened many years ago when I was a field organizer, and I ended up with a manager who had explicitly said she didn't want to manage anybody, but a series of events meant I was her direct report. In our initial meeting, I went over everything I'd been doing up to that point, where to find my weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual reports, how to keep track of where I'd be, and how to give me feedback between our monthly check-ins. She was not used to working with field organizers and was shocked that I wasn't going to be in the office except for meetings and to turn in my reports. And it's fine to not know things, but then she went and said, "If you're not in the office where I can see you, how will I know you're working? You could be doing anything you want and I'd never know." Over and above what kinds of assumptions that makes about my character, whether or not someone looks like they're working is a terrible metric for measuring what work is actually getting done. But I kept that to myself. Rather innocently, I offered to have my task tracking app send her an email whenever I accomplished a task. She agreed. The thing about me is I'm a fast worker. I always have been. It's been a bone of contention with people who I work with. I create backlogs. I make other people feel weird about how much they do in a day. I used to get upset about this and wish everybody was as fast as me. By this time in my career, though, I learned to keep it to myself and spend some portion of my day pacing myself with others, or to find jobs where my pace wasn't that strange. This job was the latter. We were doing underfunded community-driven work where the failure or success of a project sometimes meant that the people we served couldn't pay their rent or afford food, so I was blazingly fast. After 3 days of hundreds of emails a day notifying her the second I complete a task, my boss decided that she didn't actually need to know whether I was working or not. We actually became good friends after that because we realized we had a lot in common and we teamed up against the other bosses who kept making crappy decisions and putting us in bad places because they knew we were both competent enough to solve their problems for them. Neither of us work there anymore. We've moved on to much better things, but we're still friends today. I mean, I almost wonder if their behavior was just kind of an inherited thing of working with people who you can't trust to keep your eyes off of. I think it's pretty clear that OP actually kind of taught them some stuff and, if anything, gave them a little bit more trust in their fellow people. Sigmund14 quoted the section about OP being a fast worker and the things they do to compensate for that. They say, I mean, the more work you do, the more work you get to do. Don't work too much, but rather the appropriate amount for the money you get paid. Otherwise, you basically work for free. And as you probably already acknowledge that everybody has a different pace they're comfortable with, and as much as you want to judge, it shouldn't be wrong that everybody works with their own pace. Our next story is, no externals without permission? Sure. Background, I work in security, and our company has many different clients and no fixed posts. So I jump from site to site. The site in question, client, is one of the more complicated sites for us and has an awful work atmosphere. We man the gates, and next to the normal truck traffic, there are also multiple visitors coming. Some of them so often you basically know them by name, and we just open the gate for them because they're here every day. One of the middle managers, Power, from client, is one of those people who think they're the most important person in the world as soon as they get a little bit of power. For example, when Power got into middle management. Now the story, Power decided that this way everybody could just come and go in. So we got the new order to not let anyone external in without getting the okay from the person responsible for them. Every external, you say? Okie dokie. This alone made DHL, UPS, and so on not happy since we stopped them now and first called the people who take the packages from them, making them also really annoyed. Then it happened. Some very important people came for an appointment with Power first thing in the morning. Something much money was hanging on. The good girl I am, I tried calling Power for 15 minutes. No answer. Well, I guess I can't reach Power. Means I can't let the very important people in, I told them. So sorry. Obviously, they were not amused, but my idea that they could bill the client for their wasted time made them less unamused. Power came 15 minutes later. His car had issues. He told me that he has a very important meeting, and if very important people come, they can go directly to him. I then told him the sad news that they were already here, and I tried to call Power for 15 minutes. But after I couldn't reach him, I did send them away as our new instructions demand me to do. The instructions were very quickly withdrawn to the earlier system, where we could let people in if we knew who they were without needing to ask first. I was just sitting here trying to think of what kind of celebrity or famous figure could just stroll up randomly, and it would tear you to pieces that you couldn't let them in just because big boss guy isn't around to answer. Imagine if Dolly Parton strolls up trying to initiate some kind of community-driven initiative, and you have to say, "Sorry, Miss Parton, but I can't let you in." "Dead bird gonna put it on you," commented. We had the opposite effect at my company. I work for a government agency in a secure federal building. Think fully armed guards, bollards at the basement entrance, so on. One thing we didn't have is a security gate at the entrance. We could just walk in. Guards were there, but they would glance at us and we would move on. They were supposed to make sure we displayed our badges and were cleared for entry, but they were pretty lax about it. One day, a local politician came with his entourage and the guard allowed everyone to pass without much of a glance, including several people who didn't have a badge or even a guest tag. The politician was livid. After that, the guards were required to actually stand in front of the entrance and physically touch our badges to confirm we were allowed in. About a year later, we even had security gates installed and our badges were changed to the RFID type, so we'd have to touch them to the gate to get it to unlock. This next story is, I'm not barista material? Okay. Years ago, 1990s, I worked for an LGBTQ-themed coffee house in Hollywood, name redacted. These were two locations, one in Hollywood and an LGBTQ community center, and the second in West Hollywood. Both places were busy. My best friend Sumatra, 30-year-old female, and I, 30-year-old female, worked at both locations, and we loved it there. We made decent money, great tips, and made friends with most of our customers. One of the owners, Macchiato, didn't like the female employees. He would hire buff guys in their 20s he'd shamelessly flirt with and then fire if they didn't reciprocate. The deal between the owners was that T ran the Hollywood location and Macchiato ran the one in West Hollywood. Macchiato was a guy who loved to show off. He would spend too much on supplies, expensive food, overpriced coffee beans, and would give raises to the employees he liked, the ones he hired. He'd also give his friends free coffee and sandwiches. The Hollywood location was consistently making a profit, while the West Hollywood location bled money. Eventually, the West Hollywood location closed, and the remaining employees were integrated with the employees at the Hollywood store. Macchiato started to hang around the remaining coffee house to supervise. His business partner T was on a 3-month vacation in Europe when this all went down. Macchiato decided to hire his new boyfriend, Espresso, male 18, as our manager. Espresso didn't know how a coffee house worked, and Sumatra and I were instructed to train him. He refused to learn anything, preferring to stay in the office or leave for 3-hour lunches. Sumatra told me our days were numbered, and she was right. A week after Espresso was hired, he fired Sumatra for no reason, which left Espresso and myself as the only employees. 3 days later, as I was getting ready for a film festival the community center was hosting, Espresso showed up with my final paycheck and told me I was being let go. When I asked why, he said there were complaints from customers. I asked him, as manager, why he didn't bring this to my attention earlier. Note, we had an employee manual that clearly spelled out a robust correction policy. He scoffed at me and took off. I then called Macchiato and asked him why I was being let go. He gave me the same lame answer. I read him the correction policy from the employee handbook, which ticked him off. "It doesn't matter," Macchiato said. "You're being let go immediately. You're clearly not barista material." I took a look at the 2-block-long line of film festival attendees who were waiting for the coffee house to open so they could buy drinks and snacks. I asked, "Macchiato, if I'm being let go, who's going to help all the people who are lined up outside?" He said, "Oh, well, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay and finish your shift." I hung up the phone, opened the door, and told the line, "We're open, help yourselves," and then left. I had my last paycheck, which didn't include the hours for my last shift, and since I clearly wasn't barista material, I didn't need to be there. I took my paycheck to a check cashing place instead of depositing it into my bank account. That next week, I got hired for an admin position with an accounting firm. I later found out from Sumatra that it was a good thing I cashed my paycheck instead of putting it into my bank account, as the owner of the check cashing place sent over two big dudes and made Espresso give them all the cash from the register to cover the bad check Macchiato had written. So hearing this story, I'm assuming it's mostly because checks aren't really commonly used in this day and age, but I never really thought about the fact that you should just cash out a check instead of worrying about whether or not it's going to be a bad check. I mean, I guess I didn't even really consider it as an option. Not that I really ever get checks anyways. Honestly, I think the last time I got a check was from Uncle Sam back in the pandemic. Archie Otterpup commented, "Oh dang, this reminds me of the two guys that owned a bar and club in Rehoboth. The one guy just wanted to party and snort all the money away." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.